I remember the day that changed my life forever. It started like any other day. And I was sitting at the window in my upper room, looking out over the little town of Sychar where I live in Samaria, watching the hustle and bustle as the town woke. I could see all the women coming out of their houses, shouting greetings to each other. They were like a flock of bright birds as the sun reflected off their beautiful clothes. Their rings and jewels sparkled in the sun, and they laughed and chatted as they gathered together in couples or in little groups, their big water jars on their hips, as they went out to take advantage of the cool morning and collect their water for the day. I watched as the dust swirled around their feet. The sun glistened off their headpieces, and their sounds of laughter and chatter died down. And you know, it still hurts after all these years. It hurts because I'm not welcome amongst them. I rose up and went to get some water from my water jar. It's a bit tepid and stale from yesterday, but I will have to wait before I can go up to Jacob's well. And I drank from this tepid water, and I sat back down to watch as the men set up the stalls in the marketplace, and the town came alive with bustle. And I kept watching, and eventually the woman came back. It's only half a kilometre to the well, still laughing and talking, the sunlight soft on their faces. It's already getting hot. You could see the beads of sweat on their top lip as they scuttled inside to the shelter and cool of their homes and the welcome of their families. I glanced over at Aboods, my man. He was still lying on the bed with his arm over his eyes to protect it from the brightening sun. And even in that, there's so much pain. For the ghosts of my past pull at me. The pain of rejection, the pain of failure, it still haunts me. As I watch him, Abood stirs. So I get up and I start tidying the little bits and pieces I have in my home. It's not enough, but it'll do. I'm not a wealthy woman, but I have just enough. And Abood rises as I pack away the utensils from last night and pick up my shawl from the floor where it had fallen. And he smiles and casually kisses my cheek, and with a cheery greeting, he goes out to greet the men on the streets. And as that door softly closes behind him, a deep sigh comes from deep inside of me. For it feels like my whole life the door has been closing behind men as they walk out of my life. Anyway, there's nothing I can do about it, so I shake it off. And I slowly get ready to go to the marketplace because the initial bustle has died down now. It'll be a little bit quieter. And I pull my shawl over as far as I can to hide my face. And as I do so, I scuttle out the door and close my sanctuary behind me. I stay to the sides of the road with my eyes on my feet. I don't want to make eye contact. For even without it, I'm aware of the people crossing the road in front of me, so they won't have to see me or talk to me. I'm aware of the stairs digging into my back as I go past. And it still hurts. Will it ever not hurt? Do you ever really not care at such rejection? Some of it's my own fault, some of it's life, but it's there and it's real. I get down to the market, and because it's a bit calmer, a lot of the vendors are chatting to each other and sharing something to eat. And I love this time of the day when it's all fresh and clean. And over there I can see the fabrics dancing in the breeze and the call of glittering jewels over there. But I don't have money for such frivolities, and the vendors barely tolerate me if I'm buying. Browsing is not really an option. So without making eye contact, I just get a few bits of fruit and some oil to make bread. And clutching my parcel to me, I scuttle back home, eyes on my feet. Don't look, don't see. Try not to notice. When I get back in, I put our little bits of fruit and bread out, and with that last bit of tepid water, a bird comes back. And he greets me and he looks at our little fare and he smiles, and there's compassion in his eyes. And I am grateful for his kindness. Marriage is not on the cards, for not only am I cursed, barren, childless, but I'm used, not even second-hand, more than that. His family would never allow it. But I am grateful for his kindness to me. And I'm grateful for the little bit of affection I do get from him. It's all I have. And so we sit down and we share our simple breakfast together. And now as time passes, the sun is coming up. It's about midday. And if you look out over the window, the town is dead quiet. This time of the day is really, really hot. Nobody goes out now. The wind swirls the dust up in clouds and it looks like a deserted little town. Now's the time I can go to Jacob's well to go and get some water, because no one else will be there. It's just easier that way. So I pick up my heavy jar, I take my shawl and put it over my head, and I set out for this walk up to Jacob's well. And boy, it's hot. I can feel the heat through my sandals. The air smells dry. And this cover doesn't provide much protection from the sun. So when I do pass a little bit of shrubbery, I hide underneath it and just cool down. The jar gets heavy when you're walking, and I can feel the sweat dripping down between my shoulder blades under my tunic. But I let my mind wander. Thoughts of life, thoughts of hope or hopelessness. And then as I get nearby, I glance up. And I can see in the distance, there in front of me is Jacob's well. It's been there for generations. And it's got these beautiful big stones built all the way around it. But as I glance up, I feel a start of an anxiety attack. There's someone there. Especially come now at the most hottest time of the day, because nobody else is there. And now there's a man standing there. And not just a man. From his robes, I can see he's Jewish. So already, before I get there, I am despised, because I am Shemeris. I am Samaritan. For those who don't know, the Samaritans come from the same stock as the Jews, but we don't share the same beliefs. They say because we were left behind when the Assyrians took over our empire, they were taken into captivity. We stayed in the Holy Land, but we did intermarry with the Assyrians. They say there are more scriptures than just the Pentateuch. We don't agree. Anyway, those are doctrines and they don't really affect your daily life, do they? But he's Jewish and will despise me. Should I turn around and go home? But if I go home, when I come back later, some of the men will be coming to draw water for the goats and the sheep. And that's worse. A Jewish man won't even talk to me. So I change the jar onto the other side of my hip and I just put my head down and walk. I don't look at him. I stop and I put the jar on top of the wall and I start to tie the rope around it to lower it down, just ignoring him. I can feel his gaze on me though. And then I hear his voice. And he says to me, "Would you draw me some water so I may have a drink?" And I stop. Jewish men do not talk to Samaritan women, ever, without looking at him. And a little bit of irritation in my voice, I said to him, "How can you, as a Jewish man, ask me, a Samaritan woman, for water? You're talking to me and asking me for water." And his reply astonished me. It made me let go of my water jar and actually look at him. For he said to me, "You do not know the gift God has, nor do you know who is asking you for water from Jacob's well. For if you did, you would ask for living water." And I was confused. I didn't really understand what he meant. And then I saw he didn't even have a vessel to lower down into the well to draw his own water. And yet he said he could give me living water. And when I said that to him, he said to me, the water I give you will last forever. The water you draw from Jacob's well, you will have to come back and drink again and again, because you will get thirsty again. But the water I give you, you'll never thirst again. It will spring up like a well inside you, everlasting living water. And I was still being really practical, and I thought, wow, imagine not having to face the town and walk half a kilometer with this big pottery jar and then tie it to a rope and drop it. And when it is full, it is really heavy to pull it up, especially on my own. And then I must carry it all the way back without spilling any of the precious liquid, and tomorrow do it again. So I said to him, so please tell me, where do I find this living water so I don't have to make this trip to Jacob's well? And he smiled at me with a compassion I'd never seen before. And something inside of me blossomed. There was something about the way he looked at me. There was no judgment. There was no hatred. There was no racial tension. There was no gender, I'm less than. And he smiled. But then his next words broke me. He said, go and fetch your husband. And I turned away, for there that disqualifies me. I have no husband. Abud is my lover, yes, but he's not my husband. Yet another thing to disqualify me, and the years of hurt and rejection just welled up inside of me, and I said, I have no husband. And that gentle voice, with no judgment, flowed over me, and he said, you're right, technically you're right, you don't have a husband, for you've had 5 husbands. And the man you live with now is not your husband. Well, how did he know? How could he know that? Yes, the fact I'm there at midday on my own says social outcast, but how could he know so much about me? And it's suddenly something switched on, and I realized this is a prophet. He's not just a Jewish man, he's a man of God. And I wanted to deflect the attention from me. I wanted to not look in my own shame, my own hurt, the rejection inside my soul. So I said to him, you are Jewish, you're a prophet. So tell me, as a prophet, our fathers say that we should worship here on this mountain. And yet, you Jewish people say we should worship in Jerusalem. So which is it? I was just trying to deflect him from me. And you know, his answer was so profound. He saw right through me. And he didn't answer my doctrinal legal question. He said to me, one day, it will not matter where you worship, and in fact, that day has already come. Now, you worship who you don't know. Jewish people worship who they do know, because the Messiah will come through the Jews. But the day has come where worship will be from your heart, and it won't matter where you stand in worship. It will matter that your heart is worship. For those who do not worship with their heart, do not worship, wherever they may be. And there was still something, yes, he's a man of God, and I said, I know that I have been taught that when the Messiah comes, then we will understand these things. And looking straight into my eyes, authenticity, honesty, sincerity in his gaze, he looked at me and he said, I am he. I am the one. Could this be? Could this be that me, the outcast, the reject, the Samaritan woman, could meet the chosen one? Me. And something inside of me just knew this was true. And as I stood there with this processing inside of my head, a group of men returned. I later learned they were his friends, his disciples, and they had gone to buy food. And they looked at me, some with suspicion, some with contempt, some with curiosity, and I didn't care. This was the chosen one. And in a bit of a daze, I just left my jar there. And I walked back into the village. And I went straight to the marketplace because this was bigger than my shame. This was bigger than the contempt that the village felt for me. I had met the one, the Messiah, the one that God would send to redeem us from all our sin. And you know, for once, they must have seen something in my face, for they didn't spit and cross the road. They listened. And I said, I have met a man who knows everything about me. Could he be the one, the chosen Messiah? And people started to gather around me and ask questions, and there was a sense of excitement. They believed. And so I took them back to Jacob's well, dug so carefully by our forefather for his children and his grandchildren and the cattle, and we got back there and Jesus was talking to his friends. And he turned to us and he began to speak. And as he spoke, you could see it wasn't just me who believed. Everyone believed. And the more he spoke, the more people heard. And people started to say, please stay on, we want to know more. And he had offers to stay the night. And by the time the sun set on that day that started so sadly, so many believed, for we had the chosen one, and he stayed with us for 2 days. For 2 days we were touched by the love of God, by his kindness, by his compassion, by his lack of judgment. For all of us are children of God, and your past, your race, your gender, your mistakes, anything about you does not preclude you from the love of God, because he chose to tell me, an outcast Samaritan, he is Messiah. And today he chooses to tell you, you are his chosen. You are his chosen, and he loves you. Cool things with you. Well, I think they're cool. And sorry for those of you who don't like history. I do. I get very excited about it. Do you know that there are still Samaritans alive today? There are still 800 Samaritans who live on the West Bank, and they still follow the traditional Samaritan lifestyle. And Aboud's is actually an actual Samaritan name. It's one of their most famous names is Aboud's. I thought that was quite fascinating. They are a dying race because they don't have enough women, and because of lots of genetic problems, because they've always intermarried. They are now bringing in Ukrainian brides through the internet to bolster their gene pool. There are now 8 Ukrainian women living on the West Bank and who have converted to Samaritan's way of life. Okay, fascinating. I mean, it just, history is still alive. It isn't that long ago. It's still alive. It still touches us. A few other things that I just thought of when I was reading this and researching it. You know, there are 3 ways that Jesus could have gone back home from Jerusalem. The quickest way is through Samaria. The other 2 ways are a bit more roundabout, but most Jewish people would take them because they didn't want to go through Samaria and risk being contaminated by the Samaritans. That's how much they despised them. They really saw them as lower than dogs. And yet, Jesus chose, it says in the Bible, he had to go through Samaria. And I see that, and this is Marilyn, but I see that as he had to go to meet that one woman. She was that important to him that he went into a place of impurity, into a place that none of the other Jews would go to meet one woman. Like, that's just our God. He's so beautiful. One woman who was lost in her sin and her hopelessness. The fact that he went to that one little town of Sychar, and then she became the first evangelist. For those of you who are concerned or you feel called to preach but think your gender precludes you, She was the first evangelist, the first one to go out and say, come and meet the chosen. Come and hear the chosen. And through her testimony, an entire town was saved. An entire town met the Messiah. That's so exciting. And one last little tidbit. When she went back, she left her jug behind her. Now, jugs were expensive and quite precious. You never left your jug behind. And I just thought it symbolizes that our attempt to get water is in this jar of clay. And it's hard work. And you have to do it yourself. You had to tie that jar onto the rope, lower it down. And can you imagine how heavy it was if it's 5 kgs of water plus the jar? Pull it all the way up from this underground source and then carry that all the way back home and do it again tomorrow. All self-driven. But you needed it because we need water. And yet Jesus says he is the living water. And he will be a spring of living water inside of you. And what do you need to do? Just leave your jar behind. He doesn't want you to do anything except say, I am your vessel, Lord. The water jar doesn't do any of the work. It gets carried, it gets lowered, it gets filled, it gets emptied. It doesn't do anything. And that's all our Father asks of us, is be the vessel. Be the vessel that I can fill with living water and pour out on a very, very thirsty world. So I really hope you enjoyed it. The story is from John 4, verse 1 to 42. And I really recommend you go and read it. It's a beautiful story.